Welcome to the Reinventing Education podcast. I'm Rob McLeod, joined as always by Brendan O'Leary. And today we're thrilled to have a guest with us. Dr. Darrin Peppard is a dynamic keynote speaker, leadership expert, and consultant with a passion for transforming organizational culture and developing the next generation of leaders. He's a former high school principal turned leadership coach, and Darrin draws from nearly 30 years of experience in education to inspire leaders. He is the best-selling author of Road to Awesome, The Journey of a Leader, and the new book, which we'll discuss today, Culture First Classrooms, Leadership, Relationships, and Practices that Transform Schools. And Darrin is also a fellow podcaster. He is the host of the popular Leaning Into Leadership podcast. Darrin, thank you so much for joining us today.
Absolutely. Thank you guys both so much for having me on. I'm excited to have this conversation.
Tell us a little bit about your journey in education and perhaps how it brought you to writing either your first book or your new book, Culture First Classrooms.
Yeah, absolutely. No, thank you for that. I'm a guy who grew up in central Wyoming, had no interest in being an educator, and somehow found my way, or education found me, I suppose, is probably a better way to say it. Struggling as a college student, couldn't figure out what I really wanted to do. A friend of mine asked me one day, will you come help me coach this basketball team? I had played basketball in high school. And he said, I really don't know what I'm doing. Can you come and help me? And I went to practice the next day and I was hooked. And it wasn't like it was high level X's and O's. This was fifth grade girls basketball. So it was much more, like bumblebee basketball, just everybody chasing the ball around. But it really hooked me on education. From there, after graduating, I started as a middle school teacher. I was a high school teacher, I was a head basketball coach, head tennis coach, and then made my way through all the different administrative ranks as an assistant principal. You mentioned I was a high school principal for a long time, and I've concluded my formal K-12 career as a superintendent. And had a wonderful career, really enjoyed so many of those moments along the way. Now, I kind of do two things. One, I'm a leadership speaker, author, and leadership coach. And then I also, on the side, because you could never get the teacher out of you, I actually teach a master's level course for a university here in the United States on classroom management for new teachers. So that's my journey in a nutshell. I will tell you this. I honestly identify as a recovering high school principal.
Darrin, on our podcast, Brendan and I, we tend to have a bit of a blind spot when it comes to the culture of schools. We often talk about four dimensions of a school, being the organizational, the relational or the cultural, the actionable, and the personal. And Brendan and I, we focus a lot on the organizational. How do you structure things? We talk a lot about action, best practice, talk a lot about, the personal, what things mean to those involved. But Brendan and I tend to have a blind spot for putting emphasis and a priority on culture. So I was wondering if you can walk us through a little bit about when you're talking about a culture first classroom, what is that? The successful schools that do this, what is it that's going on within them?
Yeah, I'll go right back to what I mentioned about teaching a classroom management course. When I begin every semester, I ask every one of my students to share what they think of when they hear the term classroom management. And invariably, I hear the same types of things. How do I respond when kids misbehave? How do I get them to do what they need to do? Those types of things, disciplinary types of things. When we focus on compliance, which is essentially what that is, we're not really building culture. We're just simply focusing on people doing what they're supposed to because they're supposed to. When we start with culture, we focus on how we begin to build relationships. We focus on how we begin to put systems, practices, and procedures in place so that we're creating the safe environment in the classroom, and not just the physical safety, but the emotional safety, so that students know that each and every one of them is welcome, they're included, and we can really get to those things that you're talking about. Look, when we're talking about getting into best practices for teaching and learning, first and foremost, we have to establish that baseline of creating that safe space where everybody feels like they're part of that classroom. In far too many classrooms here in the United States, and I think it's probably true across the globe, kids can be in a classroom all day long and they can hide, maybe never hear their name. And when we put that culture first, when teachers are really intentional, and in the book, we have 24 educators from all over the United States who have contributed to this book. It's not just myself and Katie Kinder, my co-author, but each of them are sharing different practices that they use to develop that culture in their classroom, whether that's how intentional they are with the seating arrangement so that they're able to ensure not only that they could be with each of the kids or be within the proximity for the classroom management stuff, but also in ways that they're structuring their classrooms so that kids are always able to either work collaboratively. There's a piece in the book from an amazing educator in Wyoming named Bradley W. Skinner. Bradley talks about how his room is arranged, and actually the kids created the arrangement of the room so that no one ever has their back to anyone in the room, just to ensure that inclusivity in the classroom. So there's so many pieces that go into the culture of the classroom. But to me, first and foremost, if we start with it in our mind, we're going to be more intentional about building that culture. And everybody's going to do it a little bit differently. Again, that's part of why we use the 24 contributors. But being intentional about it, I think, first and foremost, is what really makes a difference.
I guess a couple of things this brings to mind. One is, yeah, why we feel that teachers would not put this first when clearly, most of us would come to the conclusion that this is important to start with at least. But
Right.
So why do you think teachers might not put it first? And kind of to follow up, if a new teacher is stepping in for their first week, what's kind of a few pieces of advice you would give them?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question, Brendan, and or two great questions actually. And I'm gonna kind of put them together because in many ways they really flow well together. My co-author, Katie Kinder, her primary specialty, the work that she does with schools across the country here in the United States, is all about leaning into those early career teachers. She is a teacher retention specialist. And what not only Katie, but what I have found as well working in the schools I work in is especially those early career teachers, there's so much put on their plate. There's so much, both from maybe an administrative perspective, but then let's be honest, even from their own perspective. When you're a brand new teacher, one, you don't know what you don't know. And two, I don't know how you guys felt about it when you first stepped into the classroom, but they did a lot of great things to help prepare me when I did my undergrad. But when they hand you the keys, it's a whole different game. You feel like, okay, they didn't prepare me for anything. So you start to think about, what do I need to cover in the curriculum? How do I do this piece? What do I do here? What do I do here? And in many cases, we fall to our default setting. This is how I experienced it. So that's how I will do it. I actually learned something really interesting this week. I was I was at a conference, I keynoted a conference in North Carolina this week, and listening to one of the featured speakers. I just popped into his room for a few minutes, and he had on his slide deck, he had a picture of a classroom that we could see at literally any classroom in the world, straight rows of desks. And he talked about the origin of why desks are set up that way. It was for convenience for the custodians. And yet we continue to do that. I had no idea that was really the core reason behind that. But as a teacher, especially when you're brand new, there's so much to do. And you are building culture from day one. It's just whether or not you're being intentional about that culture and really focusing on, I want to make sure that I am teaching what my expectations are, and then have a plan for how do I continue to reinforce those through the course of the year. When do I come back and reteach? One of my favorite stories from my time as a school administrator, I had a brand new teacher. I was doing her first evaluation, and I'd been in her room a number of times, but her first formal evaluation, she had built this wonderful lesson plan. And I'm in the classroom, and she was just teaching up a storm. But her kids were, some were disengaged. There was one who actually got up and left the room. There were a couple on their cell phones. There was no, air quotes, classroom management happening there. And when we talked later, I just asked her, I'm like, tell me about your expectations for your students. And she said, oh, I have really high expectations. I put it in the syllabus. This is what I expect of you. And I told him on the first day. And I'm like, well, what have you done since? Because I didn't see that. And what that leads me to is this piece. If we say we expect this, but we accept something quite a bit lower, the gap between the two is just it's just high hopes. And that's what this teacher had, was just high hopes. Because some people aren't intentional about those things. We get so caught up in I've got to teach this, and this is the curriculum, and I got to do this assessment, and I got to have this data for my PLC meeting. All of those things are important. But when we actually take the step back and, okay, how's my culture? What's happening in my classroom? What am I doing intentionally to make sure not only that I have great relationships with my kids, but that my kids have great relationships with themselves, that they're able to collaborate and work together and learn all of those skills that, let's be honest, we don't test for, but are so, so important. I just think that's such an important piece. We have so much that we ask of our teachers, and maybe the most important thing gets set to the side because they've got all this other stuff they've got to get to.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And it's so easy to take those kind of shortcuts to just get it, get things in order for the first day, week, month. But absolutely, whether it's through ongoing, personal social lessons or circle times or whatever strategy you do to kind of keep bringing that back to the forefront.
Well, I like that you're building on a real life example there with, the first year teacher you're working with. You mentioned bringing intentionality into this. And I was wondering if you can share, Darrin, either maybe from your own experience as a teacher or as a leader, or through one of the stories in your book. Can you share with us one of the success stories when someone intentionally brought the principles of what you're talking about into their classroom and what changed for them?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to go to one that's in the book. So there's a 7th grade social studies teacher in Caribous County, North Carolina, named David James. And David tells a story in the book about how they are extremely intentional, developing their procedures, their expectations throughout the course of the entire school year. And late in the second half of the school year, they have a overnight field trip that they take all of the 7th graders on. And they're at a fairly large school. They're just north of Charlotte. So they're taking, 300 7th graders, I think. Let's just say that's the number, on an overnight trip. And David even says this in his passage in the book. Most people would say, you are crazy to take that many 7th graders on an overnight trip. And invariably, every trip they've been on, the bus drivers will say, those are the absolute best behaved students we've ever seen. And David responds with, it's not an accident. They've done it on purpose. From the word go, when things come up, they take a pause and they address it. And it isn't about punishment. That's a common theme through this book. It actually goes back to my first book. I as an early career administrator, the school I was in, our culture was very much punishment to gain compliance, which does not work. Um, that's a probably whole nother podcast episode to chase that, but moving from punishment to gain compliance to focusing on just being intentional with procedures and teaching expectations and actually ensuring that we're doing what we're supposed to. I'll give you one other real quick one, also from the book. A young teacher named Jackie Mioen, who's a 7th grade math teacher from Illinois. Jackie has an activity. It's probably my favorite story in the book. Jackie has an activity she does at the beginning of the school year. When her students come in, she has a giant tube of toothpaste. She sets a paper plate on the front desk, and she squeezes the toothpaste all out onto this paper plate. And of course, her kids are like, oh, gross. And I've already brushed my teeth. And man, now it smells like the dentist's office in here and all that kind of thing. And then she asks the kids, I have a challenge for you. Who thinks they can put the toothpaste back in the tube? And of course, there's always, some boys in the back of the room. Oh, we can do that, and they come up and of course they can't. She uses that activity to teach not only can we not put the toothpaste back in, but the words that come out of our mouth, we cannot put them back in. And so in her classroom, when a student says something they shouldn't, or it even evolves into something that they shouldn't be doing behaviorally, she doesn't call them out. She doesn't bark at them. She doesn't yell at them. She simply says toothpaste. That's the word. And kids know. And over the course of a school year, she will hear in her classroom, when kids are working collaboratively, occasionally another student say, hey, toothpaste, because maybe a kid's saying something they shouldn't. She's created that community around just that one word that, hey, we know what is expected of us. Let's make sure we're rising to that occasion. So there's a couple of quick ones for you.
No, it's cool. And building those stories and those kind of quick kind of metaphors that you can go back to, a really good strategy. If I could switch briefly to the idea of leadership, you do say that it's not really about rigid policies, of course, but or school-wide quick fixes or initiatives, but kind of what role do leaders and the schools as a whole community have in kind of setting the kind of framework and groundwork for this to be successful?
Yeah, no, I really appreciate that question. I mentioned it earlier that I had worked in a school that was, punishment to gain compliance. And at a point in time, we made the conscious decision that, hey, we need to change our culture. And I'm a strong believer that in order to be a better we have to be a better me. And so as the leader, you have to model what it is that you expect. When I was working in this school and we were just about catching kids doing things wrong, I would start my day by grabbing my coffee, getting out in the hallway, and I'd catch some kids doing things wrong. I could probably get 2 or 3 discipline referrals before the bell rang. After we made that decision that, hey, let's repair our culture, the only thing I could control was myself. So instead of being out looking for kids doing things wrong, I decided, how about I just show up at the front door? How about I just go to the front door and I greet the kids and I greet my staff? 90% of my staff came in the front door every day. 90% of my parents dropped off at the front doors. My buses all dropped off at the front doors. Why shouldn't I be at the front door to just say hi, to just build relationships and to just set the tone? I never asked anybody to join me, but over time, I had a few more staff members start to show up at my front door. And the whole idea there, that high school had anywhere between 1,100 and 1,500 kids over the 11 years that I was there. There's no way I knew every kid by name. I tried, but when more people started showing up collectively, we knew who every kid was, and we had an opportunity to greet kids by name. And I share that because in many, many schools, administrators tell teachers, I expect you to greet kids at the door every single class period or every single day. And that's fine. But if you don't do it, then why are you asking them to do it? You need to set that example. Culture is not just the school administrator's responsibility. Culture is everybody's responsibility. But if the school leader isn't leading the way, setting the example, and doing the things that they expect of others, then that's when it starts to fall kind of in that, I don't know, just this vacant space where people look at or hear the words you say as a school leader and they say, okay, whatever, because you don't do it. So, I mean, there's so many things that leaders can do when it comes to the culture and the climate, but first and foremost, you got to model what it is that you want. The second thing I would tell you is, as leaders, and this is again something that leads to modeling, but you got to focus on looking for the things that you want to see. When we were focused on punishment to gain compliance, we were looking for all the things people were doing wrong. When we said, hey, you know what, let's start focusing on the positives. Let's recognize, let's reward, let's reinforce the things we're hoping to see, the things we want to see. I mean, when you see it, acknowledge it. When you do that and you model that, the same thing's going to happen in classrooms. If you're constantly reinforcing the things you want to see from your teachers instead of just nagging on, you know, why weren't you at your lunch duty? Or, you know, hey, I said you need to be at the door right now. Or, you know, just positive reinforcement instead of that negative reinforcement. Those are the things that really help set the culture in the direction that you want it to be.
One of the beautiful definitions of culture that I heard is culture is what you allow. And that means for both the positive and the negative. I'm curious, I love those examples of showing what you allow and what you don't as a leader. What would be like one of your pieces of advice for a teacher? You know, Monday morning, teacher goes into class, they want to be more intentional. What's one way that we can ensure that as teachers, we are modeling? We're not only holding the expectations, but we are modeling for students the kinds of culture that we wish to allow.
Yeah, I think and a Monday morning is a perfect way to start it off, right? Because, you know, Monday mornings can be, let's just say, a little overwhelming sometimes. You got things kind of hanging over from the weekend, and you got a bunch of emails, and you've got, I've got to go, get computers charged, or I've got to go get copies made, or whatever it is that you need to do. You're running around and you're frantic. I think especially when you start a Monday morning, maybe just begin with 2 minutes of what are we celebrating today? I have a really good friend, Dr. Frederick Buskey. Every time, and Frederick and I do quite a bit of work together. Every time Frederick and I are in a meeting, every time we jump on a Zoom call together. I was just with him in North Carolina a few days ago, and the very first thing he always asks me is, tell me something you're celebrating right now. If we start that way with our students, and it doesn't have to be celebrate. I mean, it could be something else along those lines, but that's just the one that just jumps right to my mind right now. What it does is it reframes our brains. And on Monday mornings, our brains could be, again, pulled in 1,000 directions. And sometimes we just need something to center us. Obviously, in the classroom, one of the best practices we can do is, some type of a bell ringing activity, or, something to build that, the beginning of the lesson, and all of those kinds of things. But if we just simply take 2 minutes, and you don't have to have every single kid share out to the whole classroom, just do a little pair share. What's something you're happy about this morning, or what's something that put a smile on your face this morning, or whatever, something to just bring their brains into the classroom, to let them just kind of, before we dive into math, or we dive into science, or whatever it is that you're going to begin your day with, some type of simple little activity to just bring the shoulders down. And every time Frederick asks me that question, it's doing it right now. It puts a smile on my face. It makes me just feel a little bit different. And just being intentional with simple things like that, it's 2 minutes. It's not something that is going to derail your entire lesson plan. In fact, if you do it regularly, it becomes something that kids are going to be excited to come in your classroom. You know, kids kids will find something like, hey, I can't wait to share this in class. You know, this is what I want to talk about. At first, they might struggle with it. They're like, what is wrong with you? Did you not have your coffee this morning? But over time, just something simple like that sets the tone. And it just, again, it makes everybody feel like they're included in the classroom. It gets everybody's voice heard in the classroom. It gets everybody to look somebody else in the eyes in the classroom. And it gets that human connection back where we want. Then, man, the learning can really get going.
You've come back to this idea of strong relationships and really positive approaches to collaborating and working and respecting each other. And this might seem like an obvious question, but when it's really tough for us as teachers to kind of embody this, like what are the benefits? What are the long-term benefits of us doing this approach of having these really strong cultures?
To me, culture has to come first, because we can sink so much money into all types of different initiatives or programs or curriculum or whatever. When I was a building level administrator, most of that time I worked under an assistant superintendent who was really fantastic. He was in charge of curriculum and instruction for our entire district. And he had so many amazing ideas. But he was this individual who every time he went to a conference, those of us as administrators kind of cringed, because we knew he was going to come back with a whole nother thing. And we just had initiative after initiative after initiative. And no joke, at one time we had 13 different initiatives in the air at once. And I would have teachers ask me like, Darrin, when do I just teach? I'm supposed to do this and 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 this. When do I just teach? And invariably, every time we added something new, our test scores would go down. And his answer to it always was, well, it's an implementation dip. And I've heard implementation dip before, and I've seen, there's research about it. And I think that's hogwash. To me, there's no such thing as an implementation dip. It's a culture gap. If people don't feel like they have some say in what they're doing, if people don't understand the whole picture, and if they don't feel like they are seen and heard and valued and trusted, you can spend all the money in the world on all those different things, and you're not going to get the full benefit from any of them. Because ultimately, what we do, we're in the people business. That's what we do. We're about growing people. And you don't do that without a significant relationship. You don't do that with in really intentional investment in building relationships. And when you ask anyone who their favorite teacher was when they were in school, two things happen. Number one, they light up. And number two, they talk about how they made them feel. Nobody has ever said, oh, my chemistry teacher, oh, the way he had us building Lewis dot structures, oh my gosh. Nobody will ever say that. But man, they might say, whew, I'll tell you what, Mr. Stark, when I was in 6th grade, pulled me out of a 2-year funk because of the 4th grade teacher I had who, man, really put me in a really tough place. That's my story, to be honest with you. So again, I think I've lost the gist of your question, but we have to put that culture first. I mean, there's so many other things we have to do, but if we build that foundation where, again, everyone feels seen, heard, valued, and trusted, where we don't have ghosts in our school, kids can't just go under the radar, and for that matter, Staff members can't go under the radar. We as administrators, you can't let your staff be ghosts. You can't have any of the just a thing happening, right? I'm just a lunch lady. I'm just a paraprofessional. I'm just a bus driver. Every adult has an opportunity to make an impact in the life of a kid. So you asked me earlier, what's something else or something that administrators can do? That's it there too. You've got to build those relationships. You've got to model that too. So again, I think I went way off the
No, I think
beaten path there, but
I think that was pretty solid. I mean, that you kind of touched on a lot of areas, and I think what I'm taking away is that between the teacher setting up those relationships within the class and really keep coming back to that and prioritizing, and then the leadership also modeling that we have a community that respects these and doesn't have to say, why are we doing this? Because it's obvious why we're doing it, because it's at the center of everything that's going to help us to achieve all of those other goals.
Yeah, but I think you just hit a key word right there, Brendan. You said community. So many schools, I've heard people say, oh, we're a family here, but then they don't behave in any way, shape, or form like that. It's just something they say. It's not about the words you use. It's about the actions that you take. And, developing that collective community is just so very important. And you're right. When you're doing it for the right reasons, you don't have to say why you're doing it. It just simply becomes obvious that this is the foundation. When I think about great teams, which I think a school itself is a great team when it's functioning well. Pat Lencioni's work, The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, the number one, the absolute ground level is developing trust, and you don't develop trust through talking about a math curriculum. That's down the road. You build that trust through relationships.
It's easy to forget that we're all humans in the system, and the system is there to serve humans, but we can sometimes overlook that in terms of the emphasis on what we need to be doing. So, Darrin, we've covered so many things today. Before we go, I want to make sure we tell people where to get your book, but I'm wondering if there's anything we didn't get to or that you want to make sure that listeners take from our conversation today.
Oh man, we've hit a lot. I think if maybe there's one final thing, it's probably still going to stay right within this area, but I would say, especially for administrators, but this is really important for our teachers too. We've got to lead and we've got to lean into the work that we do with more of a coaching mindset instead of just an accountability mindset. And, part of the work that I do, obviously, as a leadership coach, is I do a lot of coaching. But as a school leader, one of the 6 things that I felt was most important as for me as a school leader was to lead with a coaching mindset. And when leaders focus on coaching and growing the people around them, then our teachers are going to take that same approach to, we're coaching in the classroom. We're not just, here's the information, now regurgitate it to me. I think that's just such a critical element. And to that end, administrators, you cannot coach your teachers. You can't support your teachers. You can't grow your teachers if you're not in the classrooms. So many administrators that I see, so many of them that I work with, it's focusing on or getting pulled into the urgent and not focusing on what's important. So that if I could just say that one more thing, focus on what's important. Don't fall victim to the urgent, because 99% of the time, the stuff that we might feel is urgent or that somebody else thinks is urgent, it really isn't. What's really important is we need our school leaders to be in classrooms, coaching and growing teachers, supporting them. And sometimes the number one thing, you guys know this, sometimes the number one thing a teacher needs is just for you to be there and be their cheerleader. So really get in there and be supportive of them. It's a culture piece again, but I can tie all of it back to culture, though. That's just how I am.
Yeah. Dr. Darrin Peppard, tell us, where can we find, or how can we send listeners to get their copy of Culture First Classrooms, Leadership, Relationships, and Practices that Transform Schools?
Yeah, so the book is available on Amazon. It's available on Barnes and Noble, but you also, in the United States, you can go to roadtoawesome.net/books. And if you go there and order the book there, you can get an autographed copy. So yeah, there's lots of different ways to get it, but especially on Amazon, it's available all over the globe.
Excellent. And listeners will have the links to that in the show description. Dr. Darrin Peppard, thank you so much for joining us today, for sharing about this idea of Culture First Classrooms. And I think everything you've said has resonated with Brendan and I and helped us to see the importance of this piece that sometimes he and I overlook. And you've given us a lot of great strategies and stories and insights. Thank you.
Absolutely, gentlemen. I appreciate both of you, appreciate your show, and I appreciate you having me on.